So what we did last week is we just laid out some basic principles, and from what I've been reading and what I've studied over the years. And so now what I want us to do is to pick what I find to be some of the more important passages that address government. And then my goal is to take the passage as it is. What can we glean from it? Which means we're going to have a lot of overlap. So I think next week we'll look at Deuteronomy, where he talks about the ideal king of Israel. And so there may be overlap for what it is we discuss here. So our goal is, here's the text. We want to understand the text, and then we want to apply the text in the realm of government. How do we think about government? So I hope this is helpful. I don't know if it will be, because I'm still trying to figure this out myself. But we've been here 10 years and we've never discussed this. And this is all Americans talk about. So at some point, we ought to be able to say the Bible talks about these things. But the way we usually talk about politics is rooted in the discussions of the day. And what we need is a good foundation of what the Bible says. So that's my goal. And I wanted to wait until the election was over with. I'll let you figure out why that is. So Genesis 9. This is right after the flood. We'll start in verse 1. It says, "And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, and as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. As for your lifeblood, I will require reckoning, and from every beast I will require it from man. From his fellow man I will require reckoning for life of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God has made man in his own image. And you, be fruitful, multiply, increase greatly on the earth, and multiply in it." Now, if we were to do a full study of a theology of government, it's kind of what we wanted to do, we'd actually begin with creation. And we talk about what God has instituted, marriage, family, stuff like that. And then we would move to the fall, the sin of Adam and Eve, and how that has brought a curse upon the cosmos. And we could talk about Cain and Abel. After all, remember, after Cain murders his brother, he goes and establishes a city. And that's the genesis of the city in the Bible. We could do a whole theology on the city. We've kind of done it in the past. But this is really where we ought to begin, with limited scope. Because here what we have is we have a retelling of the creation accounts. But what is different with the Noah story is that it isn't a new creation. What it is it's a restart with the effects of the fall. I don't know if that makes sense. So how's a retelling of the creation story? Well, we have an Adam and Eve character, Noah and his wife. They have 3 sons. Remember, Adam and Eve had 3 sons, Cain, Abel, and Seth. Now, they had more, but in the narrative. Noah and his wife have Ham, Shem, and Japheth. They're all married. And those are the ones that survived the ark. Adam and Eve were in a garden. Noah, here in chapter 9, is in a vineyard. In Adam and Eve, an innocent animal is sacrificed at the end of their account as a result of sin. When Noah gets off the ark, one of the first things he does, he builds an altar and sacrifices the animals that survived the ark, the clean animals. It's a retelling of the creation story. Furthermore, what you have is the cursing of offspring. Remember that Eve is cursed, right, through childbirth, but Cain is cursed for murdering his brother. So one of the 3 brothers ain't good. What do you get with Noah? He's in his vineyard, he's in his little garden, and he drinks of the fruit of the vine. So instead of eating the fruit, he drinks the fruit, right? And that is the premise that leads to Ham committing a sin, and we can't chase that rabbit, what that is. And then as a result, Ham is then cursed. And so now you have they are dispersed away from the vineyard, the garden, into creation. And you see the same language, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. It's a retelling of the creation story. Furthermore, think about the flood. We've looked at this before. The flood takes you all the way back to the 2nd verse of the Bible, Genesis 1:2, which says that the Spirit hovered over the face of the earth. It was full of water. What is the flood story? Waters come from the sky, waters come from the ground, fills the earth with water to the very top. So the sky and the sea are now hanging out together. They're best buddies. And then what happens when the waters recede? It's the retelling of the creation story. The sun comes out. There's day 1, the light, if you will. And then as the waters recede, what you get is a separation of the firmament, to use Bible language. The sky and the sea. You get that separation. That's day 2. Well, as the waters keep receding, what comes out of the ground? It's land. That's day 3. Right? And then what does Noah end up doing? He sends birds out. Well, that's day 5, right? You still have the sun, day 4. You got birds going out, day 5. And then they land on a mountain by which they build a vineyard, right? And what you have is man and land animals leave the ark and fill the earth as day 6. It's a retelling of the creation story. But what's different is the curse as a result of the fall is still here. So everything's different. And so Noah gets off, and God is going to emphasize 3 things for Noah. It's our goal in understanding the text. The first is, we'll just put here, reproduction. That is, be fruitful and fill the earth. So they are to fill the earth with image bearers of God. And they're to fill the whole earth. This will show up 2 chapters later with Tower of Babel, right, where they're all congregating. And God says, no, I don't like that. We got to spread you guys out, and so you get the language issue there. So they must reproduce. And in fact, you'll notice it's given there in verse 1, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. And then verse 7, be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth and multiply in it. Now there's a lot of implications here, but what the text says is very clear, that the institution of marriage and family is reasserted here, is that man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, to become one flesh. So the 2 become one, the 1 become many. That's the vision. Again, this is all creation. This is the same thing you get in Genesis 1-3, the creation story. The second thing we get here is dominion, verses 2-4. Now compare this with what we saw in the creation story. You shall have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the heavens, and every living thing. God said, behold, I've given you every plant. You shall have them for food. To every beast of the earth, to every bird of the heavens, to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I've given every green plant for food, and so it was so. Now the emphasis isn't just on plants, but also now on the animal kingdom. Now, they already had dominion over the earth. Adam was to work the ground, expand the borders of the garden, and take control of the earth. Now it's made clear that you have dominion over plant and animal. So as you multiply and fill the earth, you do so as my vice regents. You have dominion over the animal kingdom. And you have to, after all, sacrifices are necessary for the remission of sins. Not to mention food, that seems important too. But you're living in a post-cursed earth. So you have to have dominion over the animal kingdom. Can I add a Bushism here? I've done this before. Share this. It's one of my favorite, what I mean by Bushism. George W. Bush. By the way, was he not the best part of the inauguration? He is so gloriously Texan awkward. I love it. And the memes are great with him. So you all know my 2 favorite Bushisms. I've done this before. One is, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame. Just don't do it again. It's just so good. I just love W. The other one, in 2000, he's running for president. He was trying to reassure the business community that he did not support tearing down dams to protect endangered fish. Clearly, this was not in L.A. He said, quote, I know the human being and fish can coexist peacefully. I love that. That is just, like that sentence formed in his brain and it came out. I just love that. Man and fish can coexist peacefully. I just find that hilarious. Well, nevertheless, yes, man can coexist with the animal kingdom, but he has dominion over the animal kingdom. Here's the third thing worth looking at here, and that is justice. This is verses 5 and 6 where we need to spend most of our time. So although mankind is encouraged to eat meat, that is not a license for abuse. So it's interesting, isn't it, that you have dominion but not abuse. Right, and that's actually where we get confused, left and right. Sometimes we get confused of this. Now that is especially true when it comes to other human beings. So if you're going to take life, you can do so with the animal kingdom, given it is for the propagation of humanity, food and sacrifice and warm weather in the winter, stuff like that. not just for the sake of for the sake of it. Then he says, but being the case, other image bearers are different. Now remember the story in the first 6 chapters of the Bible leading up to Noah. You get the curse of humanity through Adam and Eve taking for themselves what they ought not to have had. And then what's the next generation do? You got murder already. Man at his core, left to his own devices, will choose violence. And then a few chapters later in chapter 6, what you get is the abuse of intimacy, where that violence now it isn't taking of life, it is the assault, right? We got a kid here, so I'm trying to be careful. But so he addresses animal violence, and we don't need it. You can see that in verse 5. But human violence is really his concern there. Verse 5, and for your lifeblood I will require reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from man, from his fellow man, I will require a reckoning for life of man. Notice the repetition. That's important in Hebrew. Here's the poem. Now remember, the first poem in the Bible is bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. She is called woman, right? Now, the second poem you get isn't about life. It's about the taking of life. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. So it's really good writing there. For God made man in his own image. Now that's important because the image language goes back to creation. And the question we ask theologically is, has the image of God been removed because of sin? And here's a text, you can add James to this as well. It's very clear. Even though we live under a cursed cosmos, all of us are made in the image of God. Thus the taking of life is first and foremost a sin against God. So this is why murder's always been a big issue, particularly in Christian-dominated cultures. Okay? And we see that all of life is made in the image of God, not some of it. And this is really what makes Christianity unique. So we don't like eugenics, that is the taking of life deemed unworthy of life. So you get this in Germany, 1930s and 40s. You've gotten this in America at certain parts. You have the sterilization and everything else. Your friend's book discusses that. You gave me a few years ago. And then what you get in verse 6 is the institution, what we would call capital punishment. So if this were an ethics class I was teaching, we come here to talk about the ethics of capital punishment. This would be one of the key texts. Not the only, of course. So with that said, let's apply the text. What are we to do with this? Well, given that we live in a cursed earth, Noah has to be given instruction on how do we move forward as we multiply. How do we keep from doing what we already did the first time? Cain can go build a city, and then you read his genealogy, you're like, that's a violent city. You need to stay out of there. And then what happens? The sons of God and the daughters of men, however you may interpret that, they create generations of chaos. To the point it almost reads as if Noah and his family are about it. God has to hit the reset button through the flood. So how can we prevent from it? Because God says here in the rest of Matthew, in Genesis 9, starting verse 8, you get the rainbow. So he's not going to do that again. So what needs to change? How can we move forward together in this cursed earth? Well, a couple things. And again, we look at this text. First is I don't have it up there. The centrality of marriage and family. Again, marriage and family is the bedrock of every society. Okay? Whether that society is 100 people, say a tribe, or whether it's a nation of 350 million people like ours. The foundation of a functioning society is mom and dad in love raising kids. That's it. Doesn't mean that a society that you can't have those that function that way, but you need to promote that sort of system, dominion, and of course enforcing justice. So you have to have a bedrock of a society, but then you also have to have the society has an interest in enforcing justice. That goes beyond just that family unit. Why? You don't want to take life, we want to create life. And that's why whenever you start with be fruitful, multiply, you get this talk about don't take life. Justice matters. And then remember, this is about propagating, promoting life. So then most agree this is really the genesis of discussing government directly, even though it doesn't say the state or government or something like that. It doesn't talk about policy. It lays a foundation for where government comes in for us. I mean, think about it. Government understands that, well, we understand that without government, you get anarchy and you get tribalism. How does tribalism work? Okay, so let's say Frankfort, 50,000 people. All right, so we got all these little tribes. We're trying to function. We're at perpetual war with each other, right? You hurt one of my family members, and we're going to have a trial if we're that civilized. Well, who do I want? I want to institute justice, don't I? So if I haven't already taken your life for killing my loved one, the trial is going to be kind of a sham. Because you don't have an outside entity that says my interest, our interest is not in what you want or what you want. It's in what is just and right. You have to have an outside entity. And this is really the genesis of that discussion. So then what can we glean about government from this text? First of all, government has a role in punishment. Clearly, the Bible lays this out. Very clear. This isn't surprising. Government bears responsibility for punishing evildoers. Here's you two Proverbs, again written by King Solomon. A king who sits on the throne of judgment winnows all evil with his eyes. A few verses later, a wise king winnows the wicked and drives the wheel over them. That's one way of putting it. But clearly, the state has an interest in subjugating wickedness. And you do that by punishing crime. So notice here, this is the responsibility of the state, not individuals. There are plenty of prominent examples of let's say a family had a loved one, let's say murder, something really, and they felt like justice wasn't done for whatever reason. Often you'll find families take matters in their own hands. What does the state have an obligation to do? You now have to try them. Now, the country may say, look, what happened, that was awful, I get it. And there's part of us that are like, yeah, if the state did not do its job, what other recourse is there? That's the problem. That's why government is important and why justice is the primary work of government. It's clear here that when government takes care of justice, people can propagate life. But when you don't have that system in place where equal justice is carried out, you're not going to have the propagation of life because it's not safe. Wicked will triumph and the righteous will suffer. So this is a very important part of it. This is why we, in our nation, rooted in Judeo-Christian ethic, we will say the people versus O.J. Simpson. Why the people? Because it isn't, oh gosh, I forgot her name. Help me again? Nicole Brown Simpson. Yeah, I had Tanya Harding in my head. I mean, that is, I'm a child of the 90s, forgive me. So it's not, so it's not the Simpson-Brown family against O.J. Simpson. It's the people that you have to take justice out of those who seek revenge, because revenge is not the same thing as justice. The government has an interest in this. This is why the Bible gives the state the power of the keys. Romans 13, for rulers are not a terror to good conduct, at least ideally they're not, but to bad. Would you have no fear of the one who is in authority? Then do what is good and you will receive his approval. If a cop drives by and you're not speeding, you ain't that nervous. You may want to make sure you're using your ticker, if you switch lanes, but you're not nervous. It's 55, I'm going 55, we good. But if you're going Mach 95, you're going to be a little nervous. He is God's servant for your good, but if you do wrong, be afraid. He does not bear the sword in vain. By the way, this word sword shows up in Acts with the not punishment, but with the execution, martyrdom of James. Herod used the sword. So it shows up literally in a narrative. But of course, what that means is punishment, that the state has an interest in punishment. So clearly, we are to see that mankind bears responsibility with the wickedness wickedness in their midst. So when Cain kills Abel, what must be done? Well, the blood cries out to heavens, and God now empowers the state to avenge his death. Well, with punishment comes peace. I think this is an inference we get from here. Government bears responsibility of keeping peace and maintaining order. Think about it. If you're not punishing evil, you don't have peace. If you don't believe me, we can all come up with about a dozen countries who embody this to the core. It's not hard to do. You could probably find areas in the United States right now where when justice is corrupted, wickedness is free to thrive, and there is no peace. Some people, to quote The Dark Knight, some people want to watch the world burn. And the state has an interest in dealing with those individuals and groups and whatever so that peace can happen. I mean, this is a problem in the United States as we become more post-Christian. You've noticed this. There are communities here, communities in other cities and whatnot that, say, 50 years ago, you could walk around, your kids could walk around, and no one think anything. You wouldn't dare do that in that community now. I was sharing with someone that when I grew up, I had a babysitter, made us go outside so she can watch her soap operas, and we were not under any circumstance allowed to come inside. It never crossed anyone's mind that someone would pull into the driveway or stop beside the road, grab us kids, and run off. That never crossed anyone's mind. Well, when our kids were growing up here in Frankfort, well, we didn't do that. At best, you were in the back. At best. Because there's enough dogs around, we knew when the dogs were upset and someone was in the neighborhood. So if they want to play by themselves, they play outside or out in the back. And in the front, one of us was out there paying attention to what they were doing. It's a different world. We used to trunk or treat, and Mom and Dad didn't care what we did. Check in every hour, that was it. And they didn't care how many times we went to the same houses and got candy. They were going to tax us anyways on that candy. But you see that when you don't address evil, peace cannot flourish. And so there is a real debate here. We don't have time to go into it between a perfectionist view of government and a protectionist view of government. A perfectionist view comes from more Plato, Aristotle, particularly Aristotle, other ancient thinkers who believe that government had responsibility with cultivating virtue. We'll come to this in a minute. The state then promotes policies and other things which advocate and, if necessary, enforce virtuous behavior. And that will make sense because if you're Greek like Aristotle, you don't have a separation of church and state. The church is the state, if we can use that language. So everyone worships the gods. And so then the state, which is part of the religion, must enforce virtue in order to keep the peace. In comes Christianity with the radical idea, you must do your own believing. And so now you have the separation of church and state. And so most Christians, particularly in the modern era, have held to a more protectionist view of government. If you want to cultivate virtue, you need to hold the church and the work of religion very high in the nation. I think this is true. And you can do that without, enforcing all your stuff from the state. Separation of church and state. It is to say the state has the sword, the church has the keys. And this is what God's given them. And so if you want to cultivate virtue, it's not through the state, because the state is made up of wicked neighbors. Our neighbors are rather wicked, like us. So we don't want it from the state. The state has its own vested interest that is not divine. The church does. And when run right, you can cultivate virtue, which then allows the state to do its job of protect and promote all that sort of stuff. It's promoting virtues is what we're talking. There does seem to be some room in the Bible for this. That the state does seem to have some room for promoting virtue. After all, if you're punishing wickedness, can the state now speak to what is righteousness? There seems to be some room for this. For example, in Proverbs 29, by justice a king builds up the land. And the implication there is he's not just addressing the wicked. He's trying to cultivate righteousness in the land. Now again, when state and church are merged like this makes a lot more sense. But if you think about it, when we pass laws, we are affirming certain morality. So when we say murder is bad, it's wrong, we're making a moral argument, not just a legislative one. Virtually every law has a moral component to it. The problem comes is, at what point do we cross a line in passing morality? So we would all agree that racism is bad. You should outlaw racism. But can you outlaw racism? you can make it punishable by the state at the systemic level. So redlining, for example, my real estate background, that if I'm a real estate agent, or let's say a bank is giving out loans, they have to give out loans to people regardless of the color of their skin. So you may be able to say, okay, racism is evil. We can cultivate virtue by outlawing it at the systemic level, but the state cannot affect the heart of man. This is the mistake we're making as Americans, by the way, is we think we can. Just outlaw something and people change. Like, we've tried that with murder. And you could do a marathon of Dateline and you will never get to the end of Dateline. They just keep coming out, Murder's everywhere. So does the state have interest in promoting virtue? So when you look at punishment, peace, and promoting virtue, the state has interest in this. One of the debates that comes in that's changed in America is the public nature of the state doing this. Does anyone know when the last public execution in the state of Kentucky was? Quiz time. I thought, Tommy, you were like, yeah, I know. I got home from surgery, and I thought, I'm going to look this up. I only know this because I did research on this there was a public, and the last legal hanging of my hometown was mom and dad's property. So I did, during COVID, because I had nothing else to do, I did a whole research, published it, and all that. I think no one cares. So the answer to the question is June 7th, 1936 in Owensboro, Kentucky. An elderly widow was murdered, and they publicly executed him. Everything's gone private now. I think that's good, okay? Because I don't think we should cultivate. I think it's sad when life is taken, regardless of the circumstance. But why did the state always do that publicly throughout all of history? All of history is public. Jesus was crucified publicly. It was to put the fear of the state in people's eyes. In fact, Jesus, we imagine the cross being way up high. The crucifixes were usually at eye level. You would just nail someone to a tree, branches and everything. You just nail them there. When Spartacus revolted, they had miles and miles, thousands of slaves they crucified. It's usually slaves that were crucified. Both sides of the road for miles, and you would walk with your kids, okay? And you would walk, and the stench of death would be all over you. And those who are still alive, you would say, okay, they have the pronouncement of death upon them. This is Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And what Rome is saying, look, we're going to keep the peace. The way we keep the peace, you don't do this. If you do this, what happens to you? We believe in equal justice. I mean, they didn't, but this is what happens. And so you can keep your head down, and you're not going to claim that you're the king of the Jews. Now, but we don't do that, and I think that's the best, that we don't do that. All right, so if we're going to promote virtue, what does that look like? How can the state promote family values, a strong home, good marriage? And this is where a lot of our debates are. What do we do with no-fault divorce? Right? What should the government do about that? Has that cultivated virtue, or has it cultivated sin? These are. This is where we really get into the muck a lot. Here's the last thing we'll call it night: prosperity. So by protecting the innocent, punishing the wicked, the state provides space for families to flourish. And when families flourish, the nation flourishes. You want to know what is the best indicator of someone's education experience? It's mom and dad at home. I bet Stephanie, you could probably tell the kids I have the most problems with are the ones from a broken family. And so we can do all we want about education, and there's plenty of things we can do about education. But we've got to cultivate strong moms and dads who are in love as husband and wife and raising kids. And in that space, you allow for prosperity, not just financial prosperity, just life in general, flourishing of a nation. So beyond that, is there space for government to regulate things for the purpose of flourishing? Let's think of a few fun examples. Have you noticed that when an earthquake hits in the United States, it's not really that big of a deal usually, if you notice that? Not that there's not damage, but let's say earthquake hits Haiti, just south of us. It could be the same level of earthquake. Is there going to be damage? Yeah, Haiti has not recovered from its last earthquake a couple years ago. It's a failed state. Drug lords and tribal chieftains run the state now. Compare Haiti with Dominican Republic. Those are the two that share the island, right? Two very different experiences. North and South Korea. right there. If you're interested in this, Google North and South Korea at night, satellite imaging. Google that. And what you're going to find is lights galore in South Korea. It looks like Las Vegas. North Korea, there's like one light on, and it's the emperor's. He's like the only guy with the internet over there. It's pretty crazy. He's the only guy overweight in North Korea. You've probably noticed that. I don't know. But why is that the case? It's because the government has regulations regarding building codes. This building is one of them. What's the biggest frustration of renovating and building? It's those codes. Mom and Dad have been renovating their basement, long overdue. It was a foundation issue, and then you know how this goes, right? We fixed the foundation. Well, now that we fixed it, we got to do something more with it. Okay, so they've gone all out. Great, good for them. Keeps them busy in their retirement. I think in their head they had watched too much of the Garden Channel, HGTV. I call it the Garden Channel. I've told you because there's no gardening on it. It's home and gardening. There's no gardening. So all that happens in an hour. They pick a house, they renovate the house, they move in the house within an hour. It's like watching CSI. You saw all these crimes in an hour, DNA and everything. They have found that renovation, if you can survive renovating property as a married couple, you can survive just about anything. What's the biggest headache? It's government codes. It is a big headache, really, really big headache. What we do as a church to keep up with all the government regulations. So think about it. When you use our elevator, we have people who come here quite a bit, it seems like, to make sure our elevator can be used. Aren't you glad for that? I'm glad for a lot of that stuff. I go Kroger right now, buy me a steak. I know there's a high probability it ain't going to kill me. Very high probability. Because of government regulations. When I went to Africa, I've told you all about we had to cross the river. And while we were waiting for the ferry, people would come up, try to sell, white Americans stuff because we're rich, we're all rich. And one of the things they do is try to sell us food. Now, this came right out of the Niger River, which they use for everything, and I mean everything. If you don't know what I mean by everything, think of everything, they use it, okay? Use your imagination. And so they want us to eat fish. And the missionary says, if you want to eat authentic African food, I'll take you somewhere. This is too authentic for you Americans. You probably, you had all those shots. You didn't have shots for this. They don't exist. Yes. There's the right way and there's a wrong way. And this is certainly the wrongest of ways. Now, why is that? Right, that it's not safe to eat that right out of the river, right? Because our rivers are regulated. Our food is regulated. Right? Now, you can go to a lake, private lake, get your fish, all that. But let's be honest, that lake is very different because of regulations than elsewhere you're going to go. I think there's room for that. I don't know where the line ends, though. And this is really the debate that we have. So all that to say here, or think about airplanes. This is one I came across. Think about airplanes. We all are nervous when we fly. This is what I tell I don't like heights. I tell myself. Yeah. Is it good if you're riding a plane, everyone's nervous, is it better to say, hey, I know the guy? Or is it better just not knowing the guy? Which one do you think, Harry? Yeah. Well, sometimes ignorance is bliss, I can just imagine these guys are the best of the best, But yeah, it's all regulated. Compare the number of plane crashes we have in the United States of America to a lot of other nations. And if you've ever traveled overseas, you notice it. Let me tell you, when I landed in Niger, I thought Morocco was rough enough. Niger, they greet you with machine guns. And the airport itself was rather small because you didn't have all this fancy stuff. Their security wasn't, metal, they had those. You didn't have all that stuff. Like, I got a machine gun. Did you bring anything you weren't supposed to? Very different. Why? Regular. But what is the limits of that? So from this text, the text says clearly there must be the propagation of life, and you do that through the punishment of evildoers, to the promoting of peace, promoting of virtue, and through allowing space for prosperity. And where the debate is where we get into politics. But we're not wanting to do politics. We want to do government. And when the government fails in the area of justice, you will have chaos in your nation, in your community. And we've got plenty of examples of that as a country, whether pockets of it here and there or the nation as a whole. And this is really a lot of stuff that we're debating now. It's not the minutia, it's really the big eye. Is justice equal? It needs to be. You understand these are Christian ideas. That justice needs to be blind. It's a Christian idea. That the government has its primary purpose is to punish the wicked, protect the innocent. Okay. All right. Anything y'all have? Got a little early. Okay. So I think we'll do it's Deuteronomy 17, 18, I think. I could be wrong on that. Where before Israel has a king, Moses lays out what to look for in a king. And I think that'll be a good discussion. And then you can say, is that what we as Christians have been asking for in our leaders? Some places yes, maybe some places no. All right. How about we close that in prayer? Douglas, will you close this in prayer?